Welcome to a special kind of night where the world outside is gently asked to quiet down, just for a while so we can journey back through time, to feudal Japan. A land so breathtakingly beautiful, even the fall of a cherry blossom petal sounds like a whisper from the ancestors. A place where poetry drifts as light as mist, yet every breath feels as heavy as the weight of a samurai's vow. A world where placing a flower slightly off-centre or pouring tea with the wrong hand could spark gossip across an entire village, and the cost of bowing at the wrong time might very well be your life. In that world, beauty is anything but gentle. Elegance is just the silk-wrapped mask for a code so strict, so cold, that each day is a performance dazzling and dangerous all at once. Now, let's try something together. Dim the lights until your room glows like the soft mist rising over the Kyoto grasslands. Turn on a small fan, let the breeze become your background music. Lie down, relax your fingers, your shoulders, breathe in deeply, and close your eyes, imagine yourself walking beneath a tunnel of cherry trees in full bloom. The petals fall like fairy tale sighs, brushing gently across your hair and shoulders, carrying with them the cool breath of a morning that belongs to a memory long gone. There's no rush here, no need to brace yourself for anything. Just let go, let your thoughts dissolve into the scent of blossoms. Let the outside world fade. Let yourself drift back in time to a place where everyone was born into a role they never asked to play. But then, as you open your eyes inside this dreamy scene, imagine this. All the petals, all the softness gone, replaced by a harsh truth. In feudal Japan, your fate was sealed the very moment you let out your first cry. You didn't choose your birthday. You certainly didn't choose your bloodline. Your role in this world wasn't an offer, it was a sentence, handed down from generation to generation. If you were lucky, you were born into a samurai family. Congratulations, your sword isn't just your destiny. It is your life. It's a legacy forged from centuries of rules that weigh down every gesture, every footstep, every bow to your lord, each one expected to land with the precision of a line of poetry, revised through a sleepless night. But if you were a farmer, well, my condolences. For the next 40 years, your life would mostly be spent knee-deep in cold mud, bent over fields in the rainy season, carrying on a path no one dares dream of leaving. No one asks about your hopes. No one hands you a job application or a second chance, because here, dreaming is a luxury. Obedience is the only thing expected. You could be a samurai, a farmer, a merchant, or a craftsman. And once your role was assigned, that was it. You bowed your head and lived it to the end on a stage where no one ever gets to rewrite their script. In feudal Japan, there was a unique class one everyone relied on, yet no one dared admit knowing: the eater. They handled the work most closely tied to death, slaughtering animals, executing criminals, tanning leather. Society needed them, but pretended they were. Ghosts. They had jobs, but no status. They were essential, but considered unlucky. A kind of existence both crucial and deeply inconvenient. But whatever class you belong to, don't exhale in relief just yet, life didn't get easier. Let's say you were a merchant, sounds fancy, right? You had money, business was booming, everything seemed fine. But not so fast. In feudal Japan, making money without breaking a sweat was seen as immoral. You could be smart, you could be rich, but to everyone else, you looked dishonest. Meanwhile, the farmers who truly worked themselves to the bone were the ones most brutally crushed under the tax system. They had to hand over every grain of rice. If they gave too much, they starved. If they kept a handful for themselves, they were branded traitors. And the punishment? Well, let's just say your head wouldn't be staying on your shoulders for long. What about the samurai? Sounds like honor and glory, right? In truth, it was a life of relentless anxiety. A sneeze at the wrong moment, eye contact with the wrong person, or a slightly wrinkled kimono and your reputation could be destroyed. Life as a samurai was like walking a tightrope made of thread, and even one blink out of sync could send you off to meet your ancestors early. And women? Oh, don't even ask. Their freedom ended the moment their father opened his mouth. They married whoever the family decided, obeyed everyone in the household, and if they were lucky they might learn a little poetry. But don't get your hopes up about writing love poems. A woman's life was a pre-written play, she just had to perform her role, and hope she didn't forget her lines. See, every person was handed a costume and a role the moment they were born, and once you stepped on stage there was no getting off. no switching roles. It all sounds graceful and poetic until you realise how suffocating it truly was. And all of this, it happened before you even got to eat breakfast. You might think feudal Japan was all mud and misery, but actually cleanliness here was practically a religion. Sounds noble, until you had to experience it in the dead of winter. Each morning there was no soft floral towel to greet your face, just a stone basin of ice-cold water pulled straight from the well or stream. No fireplace, no negotiations. You'd be shivering like your ancestors were standing behind you, silently judging your hygiene. Soap? A luxury for the wealthy, and even then, it was made from ashes or rice bran, with a scent that felt less like perfume and more like a monk's test of courage. In rural areas, the public bathhouse was the heart of hygiene. Crowded, wood-heated, and completely lacking privacy. You bathed next to your neighbours, your boss, maybe even your future in-laws completely naked in a silence that screamed awkward. No bathhouse nearby, you'd have to improvise. Brush your teeth with salt or a twig. Keep your nails spotless. Air out your clothes constantly, not for fashion, but because being dirty was downright shameful. Samurai? The pressure was even worse. Your lord could inspect you at any time. A dirty fingernail, honour lost. A wrinkled robe, honour lost. A faint smell when bowing. You might never stand up again. And women? They were expected to smell like cherry blossoms day and night. Bathing was ritual. Skincare was mandatory. Hair had to be brushed for hours, not just for looks, but while pounding rice, just to maintain grace under pressure. In short, feudal Japan was obsessively clean. But achieving that standard meant freezing water, endless grooming, and a constant fear that someone somewhere was quietly judging every inch of you. Let's say you were born into the warrior class, the samurai. Sounds badass, doesn't it? A gleaming sword like a mirror, silk robes embroidered with bold patterns, epic sword fights under cherry blossoms floating like slow-motion anime magic. But real life isn't anime. Being a samurai wasn't about waving your sword for some grand ideal. It was about living every single day as if you were sitting through a never-ending final exam. One tiny mistake, and poof you'd go from legend to cautionary tale with footnotes. You were bound to Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code so strict, your ancestors would probably rise from the grave just to beg for a pass. You didn't live for yourself. You lived for your daimyo, your lord. His word was law, his mood, your weather forecast, and your job. To be loyal, so loyal, you'd rather get beheaded than cause him even the slightest frown. Disobedient? Dishonour. Exhaled too loudly during a tea ceremony? Dishonour. Looked at the wrong person during a ritual? You guessed it, dishonour. And dishonour wasn't just, oops, I'm embarrassed. You had to atone with your guts. Not metaphorically, literally. Through the ritual of seppuku, kneel down, unsheath your blade, write a farewell poem, and finish the job yourself. Sounds dramatic, right? If I were you, I'd hope to never be that dramatic. And if you weren't born a samurai, no sword, no poetry, no elegant chance to disembowel yourself for honour. Congratulations, you're a farmer, which means you got to commune with nature 365 days a year. More specifically, wading through mud, sweating buckets, battling back pain, and trying not to die for paying taxes late. You woke up with the sun not because you loved the sunrise, but because taxes didn't sleep. Your house had no door, no windows, and sometimes a random goat snuck in to nap on your mat. Breakfast? If you were lucky, watery rice porridge and pickled vegetables from 3 days ago. If not, a gulp of river water and the power of imagination. Working the fields might look poetic in movies, but in reality, ankle-deep mud and a work schedule that melted your soul, second by second. You planted, you pulled, you bent your spine, praying the weather had mercy and that bandits had better places to be. Come sunset, maybe you discovered one of your cows was missing. Didn't have time to grieve, the village chief was already at your door demanding the rest of the unpaid rice. You paid your taxes in grain. Your family ate what was left, which usually meant pretty much nothing. Want to complain? That's adorable. But speak up, and you might just get promoted to fertilizer beneath the old bamboo tree at the edge of the village. Freedom of movement? Not really. Legally, you couldn't leave the village without permission. So you were officially a prisoner of the rice grain, forever accompanied by seasonal joint pain as your lifelong travel companion. Festivals? Oh, Absolutely. You'd drink sake for a whole week, dance in circles, and do your best to forget that the next rice planting season was just 4 days away. In short, you were the one keeping the entire economy running, the reason samurai got to enjoy fine meals, and yet you were also the one society quietly forgot. And no, there were no days off. In feudal Japan, hard labour was a virtue, generational patience was a moral code, and expectations were set, spectacularly, pitifully low. Hungry? Of course you were. You'd been hoeing fields, planting seeds, sweating buckets, and trying very politely not to die since sunrise. It's mealtime now. But in feudal Japan, eating wasn't about enjoyment. It was about survival, about staying conscious, and most importantly about not choking on a fishbone in front of your future in-laws. If you were a farmer, your menu consisted mostly of rice. Rice for breakfast, rice for lunch, rice for dinner. If you were lucky, it was real rice. If not, it was barley pretending to be rice. Maybe some daikon, maybe a pickled radish if the gods were feeling generous that day. Meat? Usually reserved for the daimyo, or perhaps a chicken that looked at you funny and mysteriously disappeared. Fish? Occasionally, but only dried or salted, and so tough you could probably sharpen your teeth on it. Soup? Usually miso if you believe that hot salt water with 2 floating leaves counts as soup. Sure, it had flavour, kind of like how seawater is rich in nutrients. And if you were a samurai, yes, your meals were better. But you ate last only after the daimyo, his honoured guests, and anyone else he wanted to impress had finished, which meant cold rice, cold soup, and the deep honour of watching everyone else get full while pretending you were thrilled to wait. Also, everything had to be seasonal, not because it was trendy, but because there were no refrigerators, no supermarkets, and no supply chains. If you didn't grow it, it didn't exist. Winter came? That was nature's polite way of telling you to. Go ahead and starve. And don't get food poisoning either. Medical care? Keep your expectations low. The most common remedy was to lie down and think of your ancestors. You'd either recover or get to meet them in person. Stealing food? A serious offence. You didn't just get scolded, you got made an example of, publicly. So everyone would remember, never touch the daimyo's radish. Tea? Yes, but not like you think. The tea ceremony was less about quenching thirst, and more about putting on a high-stakes performance. Posture, manners, humility, those were far more important than whether or not you were actually thirsty. Every meal was sacred, silent, and full of reverence. But in reality, most were bland, meagre, and always came with a little something, suspiciously crunchy. And whatever you do, do not complain, unless you want your next meal to be served through your nose. So there you are, finishing a bowl of soup that might have been fish, or maybe something more mysterious, with a suspicious crunch to prove it. Suddenly someone says something incredibly dumb. Maybe the daimyo mutters a terrible haiku, or the village chief misquotes an old proverb, or your neighbour insists again that his cow can predict the weather, and in a moment of reckless courage, you consider correcting them. Stop. Right. There. In feudal Japan, personal opinions were extremely dangerous. Freedom of speech? Not a thing. Opening your mouth could send you straight into disgrace, exile, or an early career-ending decapitation. Social hierarchy was carved in stone, and so were your words. Speak above your station, you were insolent. Criticise someone above you, disrespectful. Tell a joke that no one laughs at, might as well be treason. Even at home, every word had to be measured. A son couldn't interrupt his father, a wife couldn't correct her husband, and no one questioned the daimyo, unless they wanted to book a one-way trip to the afterlife via katana. Samurai were trained to speak slowly and politely, even when furious, because a sharp tongue was often more dangerous than a sharp sword. Not just rude, but reason enough for someone to defend their honour. Now let's talk about apologising. In feudal Japan, saying sorry was an art form. You couldn't just mutter sorry and move on. You had to bow deeply, beg sincerely, sometimes even write a poem drenched in shame, or send a gift, like a live bird or a decorative comb while trembling inside, just in case the person receiving it suddenly felt like challenging you to a duel. Use the wrong tone? Heaven help you. A single misplaced word could come across as sarcasm, insult, or worse evidence of a rotting spirit. Silence was often your safest bet. Even humour was a tightrope walk over a social cliff. Laugh at the wrong moment? Disrespectful. Laugh with someone important? You think you're their equal? Which is why some folks got promoted to the cold northern provinces overnight. So yes, technically, you had freedom of speech, but in practice, you nodded, smiled, and prayed that none of your thoughts slipped out by accident. Because in feudal Japan, a loose tongue didn't just sink ships, it could sink your status, your honour, and sometimes your entire bloodline. Fashion in feudal Japan wasn't about self-expression, it was how society judged exactly where you stood on the social ladder just by looking at your sleeves. Clothing didn't reveal personality, it signalled role, purpose, and whether you were authorised to wear a sword or about to be dragged off by a samurai for impersonating someone who could. Let's start at the top. Samurai wore layers of fine silk, sometimes armour, always with a composed, dignified look. Their clothing reflected their status and their readiness for combat. Colours, deep blues, earthy browns, and the occasional blood-red accent. Elegant, yes, but also a quiet warning. I'm ready to deal with you if your outfit says something it shouldn't. And of course, the iconic daisho, the pair of long and short swords. Not just weapons, but portable status symbols. Drawing your sword in public was a last resort. Wearing it wrong was the fastest way to get a very painful public correction. In contrast, farmers wore humble cotton. Their wardrobe stuck to browns, greys and beige, not because they loved neutrals, but because dye was expensive and they were too busy surviving to worry about outfits. Their clothing practically announced, I farm. I didn't choose this life. And yes, these are my only sandals. Merchants wore nicer clothes because they had money, but they still ranked below both samurai and farmers, so their style had to be modest, discreet, never flashy. Wealthy, yes, but not too wealthy. Silk was allowed, but it had to be understated, just respectable enough, but never flashy enough to attract the attention of a patrolling samurai. And what about craftsmen and artisans? They dressed neatly and tidily, but never in a way that drew attention. Durability mattered, practicality was everything, and above all, don't make anyone notice you. Standing out here wasn't a sign of personality, it was a flaw of character. And women, their entire lives were spent balancing on a razor-thin line between graceful, obedient, and 6 kilograms of traditional symbolism folded and layered on their bodies. Their hair had to be just right. Kimono patterns changed with the season. A fashion misstep at the wrong festival could shame the whole family, or even trigger a neighbourhood cold war. So dressing wasn't just about covering your body, it was a measure of status, a life or death ritual, a way to survive under the constant scrutiny of the heavens. And your mother-in-law. Are you picturing moonlit strolls, cherry blossoms, whispered love under paper lanterns, or a forbidden kiss between a samurai and a princess? Sorry, that only happens in no theatre. In feudal Japan, love was a side quest, one you almost never completed. Marriage wasn't about feelings. It was about alliances, status, rice taxes, and above all, not embarrassing your ancestors. If you were a farmer, your parents picked your spouse. Compatibility? No one cared. Strong legs, good teeth, good enough. If you were born samurai, the stakes were even higher. Marriage was a political tool. Who married whom depended on land swaps, settling scores, or compensation with a fancy kimono. Happiness? Just getting through harvest without a scandal was considered a win. Love letters? Sure, but only if you were skilled enough to choose the right poem, the right metaphor, the right season, and could trust a servant to deliver it very discreetly. Women had even fewer choices. A samurai's daughter could be married off at 15, expected to master calligraphy, etiquette, sewing, and the subtle art of never letting a disappointed sigh escape. The mission: bear sons, serve tea, and absolutely never fall for the flute teacher. Real love, the stolen glances, the aching hearts existed only in poetry, on stage, or in ghost stories. Want a taste of romance? Watch a No play about lovers turning into mist. Think of breaking the rules. Adultery could mean exile, public disgrace, or the death penalty by sword or glare delivered by spouse, lord, or the in-laws, whoever got to you first. Samurai did have concubines, but that only made things messier, more people, more disappointment. Yes, people loved secretly, foolishly, at the worst possible times. Love wasn't forbidden, it was just endlessly complicated and troublesome. Death in feudal Japan wasn't some distant possibility. It was like your neighbour, your co-worker, or that roommate who never pays rent. It showed up uninvited. You didn't dream of retirement. You planned for the day you'd exit the stage. Here, death wasn't a tragedy, it was just another scene in the script. Especially for samurai, always armed with 2 swords and a personal exit plan. Lose a battle, seppuku. Dishonor, seppuku. Spill sake on your daimyo's robe. Also seppuku this time with an extra dramatic soundtrack. Everything happened in public, with ritual precision just like the tea ceremony, only with a lot more blood. Don't think farmers lived longer. A bad harvest meant hunger so deep you could barely move. Miss your tax quota. Your head might become a cautionary tale for the entire region. Drought, plague, bandits pick your script and pray folk remedies with hot water would save you. Bandits were everywhere. The roads outside town were so dangerous nobody left home unless it was absolutely necessary. Saying you'd visit the relatives next year really meant, I'm not ready to join my ancestors just yet. In other words, better to stay home and live. When someone in feudal Japan said, maybe next year I'll visit my relatives, what they really meant was, I'm still clinging to life, I'm not ready to join my ancestors just yet. If you were a woman, giving birth was like flipping a coin in a foggy storm if luck ran out. Your curtain dropped faster than a sad play. Complications. All you could do was pray the midwife had steady hands, because surgery mostly meant chanting prayers, hoping and heating towels for ritual comfort. If your husband died in disgrace, you often had to go with him, not because you were heartbroken, but literally. One knife, one sigh, one final bow to the world. And that's not even mentioning nature, the ultimate troublemaker. Earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, famines. Japan was a master artist of disaster. Your home could vanish or get buried at any moment, and your only insurance was a sturdy roof and a world-class ability to accept fate. But the scariest part? You were expected to take it all in stride. Wailing or fighting back meant disgrace for your entire family. True heroism was bowing before death, composing a final poem and leaving quietly as if it were just another awkward dinner with distant relatives. In short, feudal Japan was breathtakingly beautiful, like an ink wash painting, but death was always there, maybe a little too much dark paint in the frame. Today you might be taught to chase your dreams, to be yourself, but in old Japan, being yourself meant doing exactly what your clan told you. Individualism wasn't a virtue, it was a red flag bad luck for the whole family tree. You weren't a lonely star, you were a fragile twig on a giant ancient family tree. Your main job, don't burn the tree down with foolish acts like speaking your mind or falling for the merchant's daughter. Clan was everything, honour, future, fate. Everything flowed through the family name. You were just a link in a spiritual spreadsheet packed with duties, honour and expectations. Even samurai, the proud warriors, never fought for themselves. They fought for their daimyo, their kin, their ancestors. And if they died, the best outcome was a beautiful death that brought honour to all. Die in disgrace, and your grandpa would probably be crying in the afterlife for years. Everything you did bounced up to your father, who passed it up to your grandfather, and a grandfather's old scandal might even get your cousin in another province shunned. It wasn't guilt by association, it was living by association. Want to open a noodle shop just for fun? Sorry, your family raises horses, you'll be brushing manes till the wind changes. Love painting? Fine. But only for the family's sponsored temple, following strict templates, and definitely don't get creative. A forbidden love, a drunken night, an ugly poem downtown and boom, siblings shunned, mum in tears, your uncle maybe, disemboweling himself to restore the family's honour. You weren't an individual, you were a representative, a chess piece, the walking burden of your whole clan. But if you played your part, bowed at the right times, married correctly, maybe your name would be remembered with a not bad. And that in Japan was personal achievement. Suppose you'd survived the social hierarchy, swordplay, honour code, rice taxes. Congratulations. Now let's see if you can survive the weather. Feudal Japan was gorgeous snow-capped mountains, green forests, cherry blossoms bursting everywhere and the climate. The ultimate villain, stunning scenery, deadly weather. Storms would roll in like angry gods, bringing torrents of rain and a reality check for your rice paper roof. The roof gets blown away. The roads vanish. The rice paddies you just planted, floating down the river while you look up at the sky and sigh, guess we're not eating this year. Then come the earthquakes. In feudal Japan, they didn't need anyone's permission. Sudden, violent, with zero warning. No sirens, no alerts. Sometimes it was just a subtle tremor, making you briefly question your own existence until you looked around and realized your whole house was leaning, as if trying out a new feng shui. If you were still standing after the shaking, don't breathe easy yet, because next could be a fire, and here everything was made of wood, including your bad decisions. Floods, just another Tuesday. A bit too much rain and the river rose, turning your whole village into one big bowl of mud soup. Crops drowned, livestock took the opportunity to explore the world, and the landlord showed up to collect taxes as usual, this time with a little late fee on top. Droughts didn't spare anyone. Weeks of burning sun without a drop of rain left the earth cracked like one of the priest's old jokes. You'd pray to the gods, perform every ritual you knew, then start eyeing the neighbour's well like it was a national treasure. And then came winter. Forget any fairy tale scenes of pristine snow, just bone-cutting cold, paper-thin blankets, and fires that died out by midnight. No central heating here, the whole village had to huddle and suffer for warmth. You'd warm your hands over a clay brazier and pray that gangrene didn't become this year's latest trend. Every so often, a volcano would join the party. Japan sits on the Ring of Fire, and yes, it really lives up to the name. One eruption could turn an entire region to ash, molten lava, or just leave you grieving over your beloved temple turned into a pile of rocks. Not exactly a poetic view. No FEMA, no national disaster relief. If your house collapsed, you rebuilt it yourself. If your food spoiled, you went hungry. And if your daimyo's manor went up in smoke, you still had to pay your taxes like clockwork. Natural disaster? Sorry, not an excuse. In short, in feudal Japan, nature wasn't just a pretty backdrop for a painting. It was a gentle reminder that even the gods woke up cranky sometimes. Now, what about power? Here, power, responsibility, expectations, and blame, everything, flowed downhill from the top. You think you mattered? Think again. There was always someone above you. A farmer's life was in the hands of the village chief. The chief answered to the local samurai. Samurai served the daimyo. Daimyo reported to the shogun. And the shogun, well, sometimes even he had to whisper to the emperor, a man who didn't really rule anything except a collection of kimonos, and the uncanny ability to haunt the capital with his solemn face and empty wallet. Even samurai, those so-called keepers of justice, weren't at the top. Their entire lives were spent serving someone else, waiting for orders, sometimes fighting battles for reasons they didn't even know, on land they didn't own, and winning glory for someone else to claim. In theory, samurai were revered. In reality, they were the well-dressed middle managers of their time, swords strapped on to fit the part. Daimyo, those mighty lords ruling over provinces and armies, they might seem untouchable, until the shogun got annoyed. Suddenly, castles were inspected, letters intercepted, and a head could quietly part ways with its political ambitions. Even the shogun, the supreme military commander, supposedly the absolute dictator, the most powerful man in the country, had to live in a constant state of high alert. He had to watch the imperial court, keep tabs on the great clans, manage the economy, and most of all, keep an eye on at least 4 ambitious cousins who would gladly slip poison into his morning tea for a shot at the throne. Sure, he ruled the country, but a good night's sleep was out of the question. And the emperor? Sounds like he's at the top of the heap, but in reality he had little actual power. He was more of a national treasure. Everyone had to show respect. No one dared touch him, and no one could outright ignore him either. He gave blessings at ceremonies, named new eras, and occasionally tossed off a poem or two, though, frankly, he wasn't any richer than anyone else. That hierarchy was anything but flexible. Wherever you were placed, you were expected to stay put, like a bonsai tree never allowed to outgrow its pot. Ambition? Not an admirable trait here, but a big red warning flag. The higher you climbed, the closer you got to losing your head, sometimes literally. Respect flowed upward as a duty. Power came down as a command. Orders were to be obeyed, no questions asked. Dissent was dangerous, and showing any sign of wanting to rise above your rank, you'd better get your funeral kimono ready. Bottom line, whoever you were, a farmer, merchant, samurai or lord, someone above you decided your fate, and those below were just waiting for you to slip, if only for the entertainment value. In feudal Japan, education was a rare privilege. What you learned and whether you learned at all depended entirely on your spot on the social ladder. Pro tip: the closer you were to the bottom, the more invisible and flammable that ladder got. Let's start at the top. Samurai children, purebred dynasty kids. From an early age, they trained in everything: reading, writing, swordsmanship, etiquette, poetry, archery, horseback riding, and the supreme art of keeping a poker face even when their insides were shaking. A 14-year-old samurai could already write a death poem while you at that age were probably still struggling with your messy cursive. Their schooling was brutal, but with a crystal clear purpose: serve, protect, and never disgrace the family. They studied Chinese classics, Bushido, and practiced bowing so precisely that even the gods might take notes. Children of merchants and artisans, they got some schooling too, but only enough for business math, bookkeeping, calculating how much you'd make selling pickles in bulk. Nobody here was debating philosophy or Confucius. It was all about profit and loss. Practical, yes. Glory, maybe for the next generation. And farmers' kids, their curriculum was simple. Here's a hoe, here's the rice, get to work before the sun gets too hot. Parents taught their children how to till, how to survive, and most importantly, how not to drop dead in front of the tax collector. Literacy was a luxury. Going to school was a pipe dream, the only document you might ever read in your life. The tax hike notice nailed to the village tree. Girls had even fewer options. Unless you were born into a high-ranking family, you learned sewing, housework, rituals, the tea ceremony, and maybe most crucially the art of keeping silent to maintain the family flame. If you were lucky, you'd pick up some calligraphy or poetry, as long as it didn't distract you from folding laundry or setting the table. Education in feudal Japan wasn't about personal growth. It was about learning your place and accepting it. The idea of learning for fun would have made the ancestors spit their sake in shock. Knowledge was power, which is why it was so tightly controlled. Feudal Japan was a land where beauty could literally take your breath away. From the curve of a folding fan to the placement of a teacup, everything seemed designed to soothe the soul and impress the ancestors. But here's the thing: if you made the slightest mistake, every detail of your life would be scrutinized. Culture in feudal Japan wasn't just about art, it was a high-pressure performance, with real-world consequences. How you arranged flowers, poured tea, or folded a kimono couldn't be done on a whim. Everything had rules sometimes older than your family tree. Place a single flower off-centre, and you instantly became the village's hottest topic, and not in a good way. Take the tea ceremony. At first glance, it looks peaceful and serene. In reality, it's a full-on social minefield. Every gesture had to be timed to the second, every movement endlessly practiced. You sat in exactly the right spot, turned your teacup precisely twice, expressed your gratitude in silence while your mind was racing, wondering if you'd bowed too early, too late, or just a bit too enthusiastically. Mess up. If you're lucky, it's just a little embarrassment. If not, people start questioning your character, or even blaming some distant ancestor for disgracing the family. What about calligraphy? Many people think it's a personal art form. Wrong. Calligraphy was a test of discipline, character, and inner strength. Your brushstroke wasn't just ink, it was the posture of your soul. Messy writing? You might as well wear a sign that says, "Unstable mind, poor etiquette." Even poetry was a dangerous game. You didn't write haiku just for fun, it had to match the season, the right kind of paper, and use just enough metaphor to evoke nature and feeling never too personal, too passionate, lacking subtlety, too cold, your soul's frozen, too clever. People thought you were showing off and you'd be uninvited from the next moon viewing party. Culture here was an insanely delicate game. You didn't join in for fun, but to prove you could restrain yourself, protect your reputation, and above all knew how to fear being called uncultured. Beauty in feudal Japan was never gentle. It was a battlefield wrapped in silk. If your ikebana was out of line, you could only hope your bonsai at home would forgive you. After all these stories about class, hygiene, honour, and endless bowls of rice, you probably get it. You wouldn't survive a day in feudal Japan. Not because you're weak, but because that society wasn't designed for anyone to make it. It existed to force absolute obedience, to make every gesture exact, and to test your endurance to the limit. Every moment was a test of posture, loyalty, and the depth of your bow. Fail? Best case? Shame. Worst case? Your last tea ceremony. No days off. No chance to be yourself. You were born with a role, handed a script and expected to perform it with lethal elegance to your final breath. Wanting to change your part wasn't brave, it was suicidal. Individuals meant nothing, only family, lords, and land mattered. If you were a samurai, you carried centuries of honour, always ready to write a farewell poem before ending your own life. If you were a farmer, you worked until your spine bent like a question mark, always hoping the heavens or your lord wouldn't betray you. If you were a woman, your days were an endless practice of gentleness, silence, and self-sacrifice. Anyone else? The system existed to make sure you never strayed off course. Feudal Japan was truly beautiful, breathtakingly so. Architecture, rituals, poetry, art, everything polished to perfection. But that beauty always hid a sharp blade. It demanded discipline so strict it could break your will. It required such absolute respect that it swallowed individual identity whole. You see, you'd slip up, laugh too loud, step out of line, you'd forget to bow, ask the wrong question, wish to change even one tiny thing, and that would be enough to make you a threat to social order. But it's precisely that severity that created the eternal beauty of feudal Japan, designed not for ease, but for endurance. So now, just close your eyes, take a deep breath, let go of every bit of pressure, and let your spirit drift gently into a peaceful sleep. Good night.